So shall we carry on? Ichazo called these three centers instinctual triads. So he saw all three issues within the centers as instinctual. Later, Naranjo came up with instinctual subtypes. So let me show you more about that. So the first information that was available was to look at these triads and don't think instinctual subtypes now, think of centers, because they were a result of Naranjo, remember, not wanting to use Ichazo's copyright. But it caused a huge misunderstanding about what actually were the centers or the triads and subtypes. If you look at the gut center, this was conservation. So people in this triad were focused on the physical world. And that's green for bile. That came from Naranjo, the bile, and then the red for the heart and blue for the air. And the red is the pumping of the heart. I made it pink so they could all match and be consistent. But the domain of emotions is 2, 3, and 4 based on this need for relationships. So Ichazo saw the heart types as relations instinct, the need to create relationship. And later, Naranjo added the word closeness, but it's not just any type of closeness, but how do you stand out? And there's an emotional need for affirmation, which I'll go to. But if you look at the blue, it's about air, and it's about the intellect, what you think, what you know, what you understand, what you can assess. And originally, Ichazo called this syntony, and that's why syntony's here. But he changed it to adaptation, meaning that people in the adaptation instinct needed to figure out what they needed to do to survive. So the green, the bile, is what you need to know on a physical level to survive. And in the pink, the pumping heart, what you need in the way of relationships to survive. And in the blue, the air, what you needed to know or learn on your own or with others or from others to survive. So you're adapting to learn. And in the heart center, you're creating relationship to have someone watch your back. And in the gut center, you're going to your senses. So let's look at this. He added the sexual spiritual pole for every type, and 5 fundamental centers of attention came later. But he saw these 3 as the basic impulse to survive. So then a little bit more about each one of these, because I think it's important. With the conservation instinct, which is the whole gut center, he called it the being group, the physical being, about sensations. And then what did that mean? That meant well-being. Like, what gives you a sense of well-being? And what do you need to do to have a sense of well-being? Whereas in terms of the heart center, which he called the relations instinct, it was the living group. And one example that an Arica teacher gave in 1996, I think, was of the tree, that the people that are of this triad are noticing the tree in relationship to the sun, in relationship to the squirrels and the birds and the bugs, and the interrelationship of all these elements within a tree and the continuation of that. But noticing how things and people are related. So they're the living group, the living in relationship to others. And through emotions, you create this type of rapport. Now, he thought this also was about the circulation, and not just sensation, but circulation. And that in this center, you're finding your role. Whereas in the triad of adaptation, it's the doing triad, because what do you need to do to survive? Now, this is very confusing because you can find in early books that the heart centers the doing. They're always doing something to be likable. So one author might say the 2, 3, and 4 is the doing triad or center. Another might say the head type is the doing group. That is what Ichazo taught. But other people say, wait, the physical types would be the doing triad. So regardless of what you read, it's important to understand that doing isn't about the physical doing. It's the fear of not knowing what to do and finding out what you need to do to be safe and to survive. So the focus is on thoughts, not emotions, and not how you relate to others, but how you get the data, the information to calm the central nervous system. Not to have a sense of well-being, but to calm the chaos. The sense of well-being is up in what we would call the gut center, but what he called the conservation instinct. That all people coming from the conservation instinct are checking into what their body needs. So can you see now how Naranjo's subtypes occurred? Because what he did is he took the most primitive version of the conservation instinct and made it the self-preserving instinct. And then he took the most primitive version of the relations instinct and made it the sexual instinct. And he took the most primitive version of the adaptation instinct and made it the social instinct. If you understand this, so much more will make sense, because people think they're random or that they weren't subtypes. They're variants. No, they weren't variants. They were subtypes of Ichazo's instinctual triads. So subtype is the correct word. But if you didn't know how Naranjo came up with the subtypes, then it would be easy to say it was some other way. I just happened to learn this early, not separate from the Enneagram. So I knew what it was Ichazo, not in person in a training, but in my little handouts that I got and a notebook on the material, that, okay, this is how Ichazo saw it. But the one error I did receive, I'm going to share with you. The other thing that's important is that Naranjo took the conservation triad and used the term instinctual intelligence. And then he took the relation triad, notice it's relation and not relations, because that was changed over time too, and made it the emotional intelligence. And adaptation triad was intellectual intelligence. So what you have is a quick change in terminology, and all of a sudden it's matching more what most of us learned about the Enneagram. I just happened to get the information on Ichazo at the same time. But I was working with people, it was 1985, that were using the Naranjo Enneagram. So I just put Ichazo's work aside until I understood it more. But at least I had seen the terms and pretty much understood that Naranjo got the terms from Ichazo. So I didn't really worry about it. But I went along with what everyone was using because only Naranjo taught what he learned from Ichazo initially. Because those that were with Ichazo signed a confidentiality agreement and they're a part of a school. So if you were to use that terminology, you were violating a contract, and that all the information, whatever you learned, belonged to Arica Institute. So you won't see a lot of that out there. And if you do, it's probably information that's pretty old. And even now, if you buy a book from Ichazo, you have to check a box agreeing that you will never disseminate the information to anyone else, that the book is for you only. So that's why a lot of people didn't understand Ichazo's work.